Don't talk. The words came out in a trembling whisper as Emily Carter's hand pressed firmly over Daniel Brooks's mouth. Her heart pounded so loudly she swore the entire underground parking lot could hear it. The detective's eyes widened in shock at the unexpected touch, his body tensing. He had been about to call out, to announce himself, but Emily's terrified gaze begged him to stay silent. The sound of boots scraping against concrete echoed closer, heavy and deliberate. Someone dangerous was only steps away. If he spoke, they would both be found. Daniel's instinct was to shove her hand away. He was a cop, after all, trained never to be silenced. But something in Emily's wide, desperate eyes made him hesitate. Her body trembled, but her grip was steady, stronger than he expected from a woman who looked like she didn't belong in a fight. Against his instincts, he nodded slightly beneath her palm. Emily's breath came shallow and quick. Her plus-size frame pressed awkwardly against the cold hood of a nearby car as she shielded him from view. In the flicker of dim fluorescent lights, shadows stretched long and threatening. The footsteps grew louder, joined by a low murmur. Two men appeared at the far end of the row, their figures bulky beneath dark jackets. Emily's stomach dropped. She recognized the type, dangerous, sharp-eyed, the kind who scanned every corner as if expecting prey. Daniel's jaw clenched under her hand, but he stayed silent, finally trusting her instinct. The men's flashlights swept lazily across the lot, landing briefly on abandoned cars and empty vehicles. Emily's whole body stiffened, praying the beam wouldn't linger on them. Her heart raced so violently she feared it would give them away. One of the men stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he muttered. His partner grunted, turning his head toward their row. Emily froze, still holding Daniel's mouth, her fingers damp with sweat. She had no plan, only the desperate urge to survive. The man's flashlight beam skimmed dangerously close, brushing the edge of Daniel's jacket. Every muscle in Emily's body screamed to run, but she forced herself to remain still, her chest pressed against Daniel's side. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, just as quickly, the light turned away. "Must have been nothing," the man muttered. Their boots moved on. Emily exhaled shakily, finally pulling her hand away. Daniel turned his head toward her, his voice low and controlled. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. She swallowed hard, cheeks flushed. "If you'd spoken, they would have seen us." Her words came out breathless, but there was steel beneath them. Daniel studied her, surprised. He had expected fear, panic, maybe even hysteria. Instead, this plus-size stranger had just saved him with sheer instinct. He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped, the weight of her warning still echoing in his ears. The man's footsteps faded deeper into the lot, leaving only the low hum of lights. Emily sagged against the car, trying to catch her breath. Her grocery bag lay spilled nearby, oranges rolling under vehicles. She bent to gather them, her hands trembling. Daniel crouched beside her, picking one up. "You've got good instincts," he admitted grudgingly. Emily let out a humorless laugh. "Instincts? No, just fear." But Daniel shook his head. "Fear makes people freeze. You acted. That's different." For a moment, she couldn't look at him. Compliments weren't something she heard often. "Who are you?" Daniel asked finally, keeping his voice low. Emily hesitated. She was just a woman trying to get home, someone who never expected to stumble into danger. "Emily," she said at last. "Emily Carter." He nodded. "Detective Daniel Brooks." He kept his tone clipped, professional, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes now. He slid his gun back into his holster, then leaned around the SUV, checking the corridor where the men had gone. "They're not alone," he murmured. Emily shivered. The danger wasn't over. Daniel turned back to her. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." Emily hugged her grocery bag closer, her knuckles white. "I didn't choose this," she whispered fiercely. "But I'm not leaving you." Her words surprised even herself. She barely knew him, yet something about his presence, about the way he carried himself even in silence, made her feel tethered. Daniel frowned, clearly torn between ordering her out and acknowledging she had just saved his life. "Fine," he said at last. "But stay close. and stay quiet. They began to move slowly, weaving between cars, their footsteps careful against the echoing floor. Emily's plus-size frame made her self-conscious. She felt exposed in the wide, empty rows. But Daniel stayed near, his movements protective without being overbearing. His hand brushed hers briefly as they crouched behind another SUV, and though the touch was fleeting, it steadied her racing nerves. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time in years, someone wasn't looking at her with pity or mockery, but as if she mattered. A sudden clang shattered the silence, a loose pipe dropping from somewhere above. Emily flinched violently, nearly dropping her bag again. Daniel grabbed her arm to steady her, his grip firm but reassuring. They froze as voices rose in the distance. "Over there, did you hear that?" Flashlights cut across the lot again, beams bouncing against metal and glass. Daniel swore under his breath. Emily's pulse spiked. She pressed herself closer to the car, her body trembling. "We're trapped," she whispered. Daniel shook his head, eyes sharp. "Not yet." The suspect's boots pounded closer. Emily's mind raced, panic threatening to choke her. But then she remembered the moment she had silenced Daniel before. Instinct had saved them once. Maybe it would again. She touched his sleeve, drawing his attention, then pointed to a narrow maintenance corridor between concrete pillars. Daniel followed her gesture, his eyes narrowing. It was risky, but it was cover. He nodded. Together, they slipped into the shadows just as the beams swept their way. For a breathless moment, Emily thought they had been spotted, but the lights passed over, searching elsewhere. Inside the corridor, the air was colder, damper, the smell of oil and rust thick. Emily pressed against the wall, trying to make herself smaller. Daniel crouched at the corner, peering back. "They're hunting," he muttered. Emily hugged herself tightly, shivering. "Why? Who are they?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "Armed thieves. Been hitting businesses all month. Tonight was my chance to follow their trail." Emily stared at him, her fear mixing with disbelief. She had stumbled into a war she never asked for. Yet deep down, she knew fate had placed her here for a reason. The footsteps faded again, replaced by distant murmurs. Daniel checked his phone, no signal on the ground. He cursed softly. Emily looked at him, her voice trembling. "So what now?" He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Now we survive." The weight of his words sank heavy in her chest. Survive. She thought of her small apartment, her quiet life, the countless days she had felt invisible. And now, survival meant standing shoulder to shoulder with a man who had trusted her silence over his own instincts. They waited in tense stillness, every sound magnified. Emily's legs ached from crouching, her arms stiff from holding her bag. But she refused to complain. Daniel studied her in the dim light, noticing the determination etched in her round face. She wasn't fragile, not in spirit. He realized then that size had nothing to do with strength. She had saved him once already, and perhaps she would again. The thought unsettled him not because it diminished him, but because it humbled him. Suddenly, a door slammed somewhere above, followed by the screech of tires. The suspects were regrouping. Daniel motioned for Emily to follow as he moved further into the corridor. She obeyed, though each step felt like wading deeper into danger. Her breath fogged in the cold air, mingling with his. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was charged, filled with unspoken trust. She stayed close enough to feel the warmth of his presence, grounding her as fear nipped at the edges of her resolve. They reached another corner, where the corridor opened back into the main lot. Daniel peered out cautiously. The thieves were gathering near a black van, voices hushed but urgent. Emily's stomach twisted. There were more of them than she had realized, at least 5. Daniel's grip tightened on his gun, but Emily caught his wrist, shaking her head just as she had before. "Not now," she mouthed. His jaw flexed, torn between duty and her plea. But he remembered how her instincts had saved them twice already. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered the weapon. Emily's body trembled with adrenaline, but she held his gaze, silently begging him to trust her. Daniel exhaled, nodding faintly. Together, they stayed hidden. listening. One man opened the van doors, revealing crates filled with weapons. Emily's throat went dry. This wasn't just about robberies, it was something bigger, darker. Daniel's eyes hardened. He needed backup, but there was no way to call for it. Emily pressed a hand over her mouth, suppressing a gasp. The stakes had just risen, and she knew instinctively that neither of them could afford a mistake. The thieves argued briefly, their voices sharp. "We move tonight. No delays. What about the cop? He won't make it out of here." Emily's blood ran cold. They knew Daniel was here. She gripped his sleeve tightly, her eyes wide with fear. Daniel stayed still, his expression unreadable, but she could feel the tension vibrating off him. For a fleeting moment, Emily wondered why fate had chosen her, why she, of all people, was standing here beside him. But deep down, she knew. Maybe the world had underestimated her all her life, but not tonight. As the man slammed the van doors shut, Daniel leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "When I say run, you run. Understand?" Emily nodded shakily, though every part of her wanted to stay and fight with him. Her size, her presence, had always made her feel like a burden, but tonight, she had already proven otherwise. She wasn't just background, she was survival, and she wasn't ready to fade into invisibility again. Daniel's hand brushed hers briefly, grounding them both. "Trust me," he whispered. She almost laughed. If only he knew how much he already trusted her. The thieves began to disperse, their voices echoing into the cavernous lot. Daniel tensed, preparing to move. Emily clutched her grocery bag, her heart hammering. She didn't know how this night would end, but she knew one thing with certainty. The moment she pressed her hand over his mouth, everything had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was part of this fight. And as they crouched in the shadows, side by side, she realized the story of her life was only just beginning born, not out of fear, but out of the courage to act when it mattered most. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears as she crouched beside Daniel, hidden in the shadows of the maintenance corridor. The men's voices echoed across the parking lot, the words sharp and certain. They knew a cop was here. She stole a glance at Daniel. His jaw was tight, eyes narrowed, his entire body coiled like a spring. He looked ready to leap into battle at the slightest opening. But Emily knew better than to underestimate the danger. There were too many of them. If Daniel acted alone, he would be outnumbered in seconds. Daniel leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "We need to get out of here. If we can reach the exit ramp, I can call for backup." Emily nodded, though dread gnawed at her. Between them and safety stood at least 5 armed men. Her stomach twisted, but she forced herself to focus. She had already silenced Daniel once, had stopped him twice from acting rashly. She wasn't going to fail him now. "Tell me what to do," she whispered. For the first time, Daniel looked at her not as a bystander, but as a partner. They moved slowly, keeping to the shadows. Emily's footsteps fell thunderous in her ears, though in truth she stepped as lightly as she could. Her size made her self-conscious. Would the man hear her breathing, notice the shift of her weight on the concrete floor? But Daniel stayed close, one hand on her shoulder, guiding her. His touch was steady, his presence grounding. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like her body was a liability. She felt like it was part of her strength, solid, real, unmovable. They crept past a row of SUVs when a sudden bark of laughter erupted from the man near the van. Emily flinched. One of the thieves stepped away from the group, scanning the area. His flashlight beam swept dangerously close. Daniel pressed Emily against the car, shielding her with his body. She felt the heat of him, the steadiness of his breath. The beam lingered for a heart-stopping second, then moved on. Emily's knees nearly buckled with relief. She clutched her grocery bag tighter, silently thanking fate that the fruit inside hadn't rattled. Just as they were about to move again, a metallic clatter echoed from the far corner of the lot. One of the thieves cursed. "Check it out." 2 men split off from the group, their boots pounding against the floor as they moved toward the noise. Daniel's eyes sharpened. "This is our chance," he whispered. Emily nodded, her throat dry. They darted from cover, moving quickly but carefully. Each step felt like a gamble, but the noise had drawn the men's attention elsewhere. For the first time, hope flickered. They reached the stairwell door. Daniel pulled at the handle. It groaned loudly, rusted and stiff. Emily winced. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Did you hear that?" one of the thieves shouted. Light swung toward them. Panic surged through Emily's chest. "Run!" Daniel hissed, shoving the door open. They bolted into the stairwell, the heavy door slamming shut behind them. Boots thundered in pursuit, shouts rising. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps as they climbed, her legs screaming in protest. Daniel stayed just ahead, glancing back constantly, unwilling to leave her behind. They reached the second-level landing when the door below burst open. The thieves spilled into the stairwell, flashlights bouncing. "Go," Daniel urged. Emily forced her aching legs to keep moving. Her size made every step harder, but adrenaline pushed her upward. By the third level, her chest burned, sweat dampening her blouse. She stumbled, nearly collapsing. Daniel caught her, his arm strong around her waist. "Don't stop," he said, his voice fierce but not unkind. "You can do this." His faith lit something inside her, a fire that burned hotter than fear. She nodded, pushing forward. At the fourth level, Daniel yanked open another door, pulling Emily through. They stumbled into a dimly lit corridor lined with storage rooms. He slammed the door behind them, bracing it with his shoulder. Emily pressed her back to the wall, gasping for breath. "They're too close," she whispered. Daniel's eyes scanned the hallway, calculating. "Then we make them think we're gone." He pointed toward a storage room ahead. Emily hesitated. Hiding? It felt wrong, cowardly. But then she remembered her silence had saved them before. Sometimes survival meant waiting for the right moment. They slipped into the storage room, shutting the door softly. The air smelled of oil and dust, the single bulb overhead flickering. Emily pressed herself against the wall, her body trembling with exhaustion. Daniel crouched by the door, gun ready. Voices approached, muffled but growing louder. "They came this way," a man shouted. Emily's heart pounded. She squeezed her eyes shut, silently begging the universe to keep them hidden. Daniel glanced back at her. Even in the dim light, he could see the fear etched on her face, but also the determination. She wasn't breaking. Not now. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A hand rattled the handle. Emily's breath caught. She wanted to scream, to run, but she bit her lip until she tasted blood. Daniel raised his gun, muscles tense. The handle jiggled again. Then, suddenly, a shout came from further down the hall. "This way! I saw them!" The men cursed, letting go of the door. Their boots thundered away, chasing shadows. Emily slumped against the wall, tears of relief slipping down her cheeks. Daniel lowered his gun slowly, exhaling hard. "That was too close." Emily wiped her face quickly, embarrassed. "I slowed you down," she whispered. Daniel shook his head sharply. "No, you kept me alive, twice now." His voice was low but firm, leaving no room for doubt. Emily blinked, stunned. She had always been the one overlooked, dismissed, mocked for her body. But here, in the dark, with danger pressing close, this hardened detective was crediting her with survival. Her chest tightened, a strange mix of fear and pride swelling inside her. They waited until silence settled again, then Daniel motioned for her to follow. They slipped back into the corridor, moving toward the exit signs glowing faintly ahead. Emily's legs ached with every step, but she kept going. She thought of the baby she had once soothed on the plane, the children she'd helped neighbors raise, all the little ways she had mattered when no one noticed. Tonight, all of that mattered. Tonight, she wasn't invisible. She was vital. At the end of the corridor, they reached another door. Daniel eased it open carefully, revealing the upper level of the parking lot. It was quieter here, fewer cars, more open space. But the van below was still visible through the gaps, the men moving quickly to load their crates. "If they leave, they'll disappear," Daniel muttered. Emily followed his gaze, dread twisting her stomach. Weapons, violence, chaos, they couldn't let it spread. But how could two people stop it? Back up? Emily asked softly. Daniel shook his head. Signal's still dead. We need to reach the street. He scanned the lot, eyes sharp. But they'll spot us if we make a run for it. Emily bit her lip, thinking. She wasn't trained for this, wasn't a cop. But she knew fear. She knew how people underestimated her, dismissed her. And maybe, just maybe, that could be their advantage. What if they don't see you at all? She whispered. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Emily steadied her breath. Let them notice me. They won't think I matter. You move while they're distracted. Daniel stared at her, shocked. That's too dangerous. Emily's voice shook, but her eyes were steady. So is everything else tonight. But at least this way, you have a chance. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Daniel swore softly under his breath. You're insane! But there was admiration in his tone. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch lingering. If we get out of this alive, you and I are going to have a long talk. Emily managed a shaky smile. Deal. They moved closer to the edge of the level, crouching behind a row of cars. The thieves were still below, arguing over the crates. Emily's heart thundered. She had never been the center of attention willingly. Her body always drew stares, but never for the right reasons. Tonight, she would use it. Tonight, her presence would be a weapon. She straightened slowly, stepping into the dim light where they could see her. Hey, she called, her voice cracking but loud enough. Every head snapped upward. Flashlights blinded her. What are you doing here? One man barked. Emily forced herself to stand tall, even as her knees shook. I was just leaving, she stammered, clutching her grocery bag. The man laughed cruelly. Look at her. Wrong place, wrong time. Their attention fixed on her, sneers dripping from their voices. None of them noticed Daniel slipping silently along the shadows, moving toward the exit ramp. Emily's chest tightened, fear clawing at her throat, but she held her ground. For once, the mockery didn't break her. It shielded Daniel. It gave him time. One of the thieves started climbing the ramp toward her. Emily's breath caught, but she didn't retreat. She gripped the strap of her bag tightly, her knuckles white. The man sneered. What's in the bag, sweetheart? He reached out as if to grab it. Emily's mind raced. She could run, but that would draw their eyes upward toward Daniel. Instead, she did something wild. She hurled the bag down the ramp. Oranges scattered across the concrete, bouncing and rolling. The men shouted, stumbling as they tried to avoid the rolling fruit. Emily used the chaos to back away. Below, Daniel reached the ramp's top, his phone buzzing faintly. A single bar of signal flickered. He typed furiously, sending a call for backup before the bar vanished. Relief surged through him. They had a chance now. He looked back at Emily, her body framed in flashlight beams, her expression fierce despite her trembling hands. She had risked everything to buy him those seconds. His chest tightened. She wasn't just surviving tonight. She was fighting. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. The thieves cursed, realizing too late they had been played. Move the van, one shouted. Emily stumbled backward, her heart racing, as Daniel appeared beside her, gun drawn. It's over, he said firmly, his voice like steel. Emily gasped in relief, her body shaking. She had thought herself weak, invisible, a burden. But tonight she had silenced a cop, saved his life, and faced down armed men. And as the sirens closed in, she realized something she never thought she'd believe. She was braver than she had ever imagined.